Hi everybody, I'm Thibault, the founder of Richly. I've been based out of Bangkok, Thailand for almost the last 10 years of my life. And today we're going to be talking about how to scale in APAC. Right, so first of all, I want to give you a bit of background. I've worked in corporate and a bunch of startups, again, for the last 8-9 years of my life, based out of Bangkok, Thailand. I recently founded Richly, which is a go-to-market slash lead generation clay agency. Been doing that for almost 2 years now. And we help B2B companies, SaaS, cybersecurity companies, consulting companies get more meetings through a bunch of different systems. So we were the first clay expert agency based out of Southeast Asia, the first one based out of Thailand. We organized the first clay event in Bangkok a couple months ago, and we're looking to kind of do the second edition very soon. We have clients in more than 7 industries and 9 countries, but we had initially a very strong APAC focus. So we've worked with companies in Australia, Singapore, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand. And so today we're going to be talking about the specificities of scaling a business within APAC. So why is APAC a blue ocean, right? So the main reason why APAC is really still a blue ocean is when you think about it, LinkedIn is the main platform that we use, is one of the main platforms that we use when you do outreach. But on the flip side of that, it's the main platform that data providers use to scrape and find contact details of business owners, decision makers, and whatnot. I think the main challenge, which is a great opportunity, is that not many people are tapping into LinkedIn in Asia Pacific, as opposed to the way people are doing it in Europe and Middle East, as well as in the US. But it's especially the US is leading that market. In the Europe and Middle East, there's a few less people doing so. If I were to give you guys a couple examples of people that have been super successful at building a personal brand in APAC, off the top of my mind, I could quickly think about a person like Audrey Chia. She's based out of Singapore. She helps people write content with AI that doesn't lose their authenticity and voice. And soul, as a lot of people say. I think she's got about 60,000 followers and she's built a great business. So now what we're going to be talking about is the 4 steps of living and launching your go-to-market system in APAC, right? So what you want to be doing, step number 1, is you want to be able to map your entire total addressable market. Very important. So if you're an APAC company and you want to expand regionally, you want to understand, I mean, you probably already know that, obviously, your industries, but within those industries and those countries, what are the technographics and the firmographics, as a lot of people call it, pretty much the details like employee size, location, and all that about the companies that would be a good fit for you. Once you define those criteria, what you want to be doing is for each of those countries, you want to find the best database to scrape details about those companies, right? Because you will find different directories in Australia than you would find in Singapore, than you'd find in Thailand, and you also find different databases that have good data. So then what you want to be doing is you want to be tiering your markets, right, in terms of annual contract value and potential deal size that you'll be going from those companies, whether that's on a country level, right, where you want to be looking at the emerging markets versus, the already established markets, or that's on the company side level. Right? You could also just say, I'm going to take everyone within APAC and say, which are the tier 1 companies because they have, let's say more than 1,000 employees, or because they just fundraise, or because X, Y, and Z, which are the tier 2, which are the tier 3. And it's very, very important to actually tier your companies because when you build an outbound campaign, whether you do it manually or automated, by the way, you should always start by the bottom tier because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to want to refine your messaging and your approach and your offer and your lead magnets and whatever you're using to drive conversations. And it's best if you do that with tier 3 companies rather than tier 1, because if you lose a tier 3 deal, it's much less impactful than if you actually lost a tier 1 potential deal. You also potentially want to take into account decision-making pattern, right? Depending across all of those countries. So that like in Japan, Korea, there's multiple stakeholders. The buying committee is very big. Thailand is a little bit of the same, but Thailand and Indonesia most likely is going to be the C-level is going to be making the final decision, and if he doesn't want it, it doesn't go. So just giving you some examples on the best platforms in order for you to find those. What I highly recommend everyone to use. And so we're talking about the time mapping, right? 4 steps to GTM system and to launching your campaign and scaling in APAC. At the center of everything we do is clay. For a lot of different reasons, but the main reason is because, especially when you do things at scales, if you're doing things manually, you could literally use Google Sheet and it will work really fine, right? But if you're really doing things at scale, you want to start using platforms like Clay that allows you to enrich and score companies automatically at scale. Meaning if you have 5,000 companies in your TAM or 10,000 companies in your TAM, you actually can check for every single one of those companies, are they running ads? What was their web traffic this year? You can really do pretty much anything you think of, but the beauty of Clay is it allows you to do it for every single company individually at scale, right? So that's why we use Clay. We're a Clay partner, obviously. If you want 3,000 free Clay credits, you can just message me. I'll give you a link where you can get that straight away. So that's really what I recommend you to use. Even if you just use the 3,000 free credit, that might be enough if you're doing things manually. And if you want to do things at scale, you probably need a bit more than that. Now let's move into LinkedIn optimization. And very often people tell me, hey Thibault, yeah, I don't get it. Why are you talking about LinkedIn optimization when we're doing cold emails together? And people are just going to see my email. I was like, yes, that's correct. They're going to see your email. And if they receive from you an email and not a LinkedIn DM, because we do multi-channel, why would you care about LinkedIn? The reason is very simple. The main thing that most people do once they receive a cold email is they're going to Google your name, your company. And LinkedIn ranks really well for SEO. So you're likely going to appear top 1, top 2, unless you have a lot of other people that have the same name as you. You're likely going to appear in the top of the Google page. So once they actually land onto your LinkedIn profile, that's why having an optimized LinkedIn profile is very important. And I always say this to my clients. We live in a world where attention span's gone down massively. People, are too used to scrolling TikTok and all that stuff that they're not really used to spending 20, 30, 40, 50 seconds anymore on something. So once they get to your LinkedIn profile, remember they don't know you, they just receive a cold email from you. Once they get to your LinkedIn profile, you want it to be crystal clear and for them to understand within 3 seconds who you are, what you do, and why they should care. Because if they don't get that, they're likely gonna close that page, delete that email, and say, yeah, forget about it. Or maybe the offer wasn't good enough, right? So that's why LinkedIn profile optimization is very important. When you optimize your profile, what do you want to optimize for? I like to start top to bottom, right? So starting on the top, the banner. It's a massive piece of digital real estate. So you want it to be well designed, look professional. Don't do something on your own on Canva, which you think looks cool. Try and get someone to actually design it for you so it looks professional. And that banner should have social proof if you can, ideally USP or your elevator pitch, and then some other cool things about your brand and your branding colors and all that stuff. If your core focus is Singapore companies, or let's say you have 3 markets of focus, but you know that Singapore is 70% of your business, maybe on your banner you should have a Singapore phone number to show that you're a local business and you have a local entity and local phone numbers, etc. People tend to respond to that. Second is your profile picture. You want to be looking at the camera, having a big nice smile. If you don't want to smile, you're too shy to smile, just be normal, but try to look approachable because again, that's the only thing people will know about you when they get that DM, is they'll see that picture and that's likely going to influence whether or not they want to reply to the DM. Of course, on top of what that DM contains and what you're offering to them. The third thing is headline, right? So I used to have the formula, I help businesses X do Y and Z type of formula. And then I had I think it was almost 8 months ago, I had Arno Belinga from Break Cold on a podcast with me in Bangkok, again, I think about 8 months ago. And he said, oh yeah, no, I do founder at company name as the beginning of my headline. I was like, why do you do that? No one does that. He goes, yeah, because when you comment on people's profile or when you post, the first thing that people see is founder at your company name. And that's massive brand equity. And I was like, oh, actually, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it really helps because, again, it helps push your brand in front of as many people as possible. So great tip, Arno. Next one is your about section. You really want to write your about section the way, it's almost like a story. You want to have it be engaging. You don't want to be a third person, massive block of text about who you are and what you do. Make it engaging. Again, if people took all the effort to go all the way to your about section, try and write it in a way that makes them want to stay on it. So even with a free profile, you have the option of having a featured section where you can add links to your profile. I would recommend you to have 2 featured section cards. I know I only have 1 at the moment. One should probably be a link to a contact us page, and another one should be a bit of a less friction way of getting attention, which is a lead magnet, right? So like clicking into a lead magnet for them to get a free resource, a free guide, a free course, or anything that could get them into your funnel. The second thing is the logos and any sort of social proof you add on your website, try and have it be as recognizable as possible. So if you've worked with 60 plus brands and you have authorization from all of them to use their logos on your website, you want to make sure to choose the top 5 or the top 4 that you can display on LinkedIn that are going to be the one with the biggest brand awareness in the region. Because again, when people get to your profile, they're like, hey, I've seen this logo, I've seen that logo. And they're like, okay, these guys know what they're doing. And then probably you also want to be mentioning your achievements you want to be mentioning your regional achievements. So you don't want to say we've helped 50 companies. You can say we've helped 50 APAC companies achieve XYZ, right? So this is it when it comes to LinkedIn profile optimization. If anything is unclear, just message me. More than happy to give you a quick feedback on how your profile looks like. Let's move on to the third point. The third point is your content strategy. So first and foremost, focus on your personal brand. Company page have close to no value. If you post something on a company page that has 3,000 followers versus something on the personal profile that has 3,000 connections, the reach is going to be at least 4 to 5 times bigger on the personal profile. Just because LinkedIn is trying to push for personal branding and people to have their personal brand, and they put less importance on LinkedIn company page. So that's very important. The second thing is, and that's a bit of a challenge, depending on how narrow is your region and in APAC and which country you're focused on, time zone, right? You want to be looking at which time is the most optimal time for you to post on LinkedIn to make sure that you hit people that are in Australia and it's not already lunchtime for them, and in Singapore, and you can also potentially hit people in Thailand, and it's not too early for these guys. Another thing that I find very, very strong on LinkedIn and that I've been doing a lot is you want to be collaborating, right? So what does that actually mean? That means you want to be creating content with other people who speak to the exact same audience as you, but they don't offer the same services as you, right? So they're not actually competitors of you, not at all, but they speak to the same ICP. And the beauty in this is they will benefit from it because the exposure they'll get from your content is going to be seen by your clients and your network, and they might actually reach out to them. And the other way around is true as well. So we've talked about content strategy, right? What does that exactly mean, and what type of contents are there? So there's 3 types of content. There's what they call tofu, mofu, and bofu, right? I know they sound funny, they're just acronyms. Tofu just means top of funnel. So brand awareness content, industry insights, cheat sheets, listicles. It could also be life story, even though I prefer to include personal stories within those 3 type of contents and not just have personal story be its own type of content. Middle funnel will be more like educational, know-how, guides. Again, it could be listicles and examples of tools that you're using and all that. You want to be showing your expertise and growing your authority in the space. And then finally, bofu, bottom of funnel. Those are case studies, testimonials, and things like this. And you don't want to be overdoing it because people get kind of bored of it. You need to have a great spread in terms of type of business. If you're into the early days of your business, you should focus on tofu and mofu at least for 2-3 months to grow traffic, to grow engagement, and then slowly move into bottom of funnel. In terms of a language strategy, I think it really depends on the country that you're going after. Obviously, if you look at countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, even Thailand, I would suggest an English first approach because that's what most people doing business are going to be using. And then if you start looking at other countries like Japan, Korea, Vietnam, maybe Indonesia as well, you might need to have local language. Now that we've talked about the different content strategy, let's talk about the different type of content and creatives that you can be using, right? So you could potentially be using images, you could be using carousels, you could be using videos, and you can be using post, like text. Don't use polls, they don't really do so well. Out of those four, I honestly think that they all do well, but you again need to have a strategy where you're splitting it. You don't want to just do carousel or just do video and everything. You need to test it because it all depends at the end of the day about your audience. Right, so this was everything about content strategy. Now let's move into the final part of this masterclass. It's launching your outbound at scale, right? So the challenge you're going to be having again is communications styles and ways of doing business in the region really depends. So one thing that you might want to be looking at is don't treat every country the same. Again, I think it's very important in APAC that you cater your sequences and your campaigns in different ways depending on the seniority of the people you're going after, as well as the country that you're going after. And you could potentially segment it even further by looking at industries. Because people in the finance and legal industry, they're going to be much more traditional in their business approach, as opposed to people in the startup environment and SaaS industries. Now, on the back of that, there's two main channels you want to be using when you're doing your outbound: LinkedIn and email. Again, I would highly recommend you to do both. But if you had to choose certain country to focus on with a specific channel, probably you would want to be looking at Australia or Thailand for LinkedIn, because they do pretty well. And then emails, you could probably do Singapore and Indonesia. That's what we found that works best. But there's no one answer fits all. It really depends on you, who you're going after, your industries, and all that. Now, as mentioning earlier in the very first part of this 4-step process, the enrichment, right? So we've enriched companies and we know whether or not they're running ads, whether or not they've been growing, if they've raised funding in the last year, if they hired more than 3 people. Whatever enrichment we think of, all is possible. You could, again, either do it manually or you could do it automated through Clay. Another thing that we can do, so those are what we call signal enrichments, right? Because it's a signal that the company is doing well. If they've hired X, or if they grew 30% year on year, or if the similar web traffic is down 50% year on year, those are signals that something is happening. On the flip side of that, because now we're talking about outbound, we're going to mention those signals maybe, or we're going to be saying because they have those signals, we're then going to be reaching out to them with that offer. That's the way we approach things. So the other type of signals is going to be signal triggers, right? So the moment something happens, we're going to be reaching out to them, right? So let's say they've raised a pre-seed round. The moment that happens and there is news about it, or some of the platforms will monitor and scrape on a daily basis, trigger that signal. That's why it's called a signal trigger. We're going to be reaching out to them. Hey, John, congrats on the fundraise. That probably means that now XYZ is a pain point. We have Y as a solution. Love to have a chat. Or here's a resource we put together for you. I would love to give that to you. Right? So those triggers, again, it really depends on what you sell and who you sell it to, but there's a very, very big list of them. All right. Last but not least is your GTM tech stack. When it comes to launching your outbound campaigns, but again, it's going to heavily depend on what we talked about, who you're targeting, the country, the seniority, and everything, as well as whether you're going to be doing this manually or automated, right? So if it's manual, this doesn't apply so much, but if you're going to automate this, here are the main things that you're going to need to do. So first is your infrastructure. You're going to need to have a proper infrastructure for your cold emailing domains. So what that looks like is you want to buy subdomains, never send cold emails for your main domain because you might hurt the deliverability. So you want to buy subdomains and you want to set them up on a platform like Zapmail. Again, we're a Zapmail partner. If you need any help with that, reach out to me. More than happy to give you a link and a guide on how to get set up on there. The second thing is you want to think about your offer, right? Because there's only 4 parameters to a successful outbound campaign. The first one is the infrastructure. The second one is, let's even talk about that before offer, is the data. You want to make sure that whoever you have in your list of companies and the people that are working at those companies have been double verified. You've run like a one-to-one check to make sure that they still work in those companies, because a lot of the time, if you scrape Apollo and you scrape other platform, they'll tell you, yes, this guy is the CMO of this company, but it's actually not that anymore because it's changed job or the platform was updated and not up to date. So it's very important that you double verify any email you're about to send to not hit, the spam folder or get higher bounce on your email.
That's one. And the second thing is you want to run a one-to-one check whether or not that person is still working in that company, right? So that's on the data side of things. And I feel like on the flip side of the data, you can also talk about the triggers we just talked about. It's like how relevant your data is, but we've already just talked about that. So now the third thing is going to be your offer. What does your offer look like? I always tell my clients and the people I just have calls with discovery calls with, is that not everything is going to sell the same, right? Not everything is also easy to sell through cold outreach campaigns because it's cold outreach. These people don't know you, they don't know your brand, they've never heard about you before. So if you approach them and say, hey, I have this $100,000 software, would you like to buy it? There's a very few chances that they actually say yes to. But if you say something like, hey, we have this software used by company A, B, and C, and it's going to help you save on Y, and here's a 3-week free trial, no strings attached, that's probably going to be doing better, right? So you really want to be thinking about what is going to be your offer for your campaign that remove as much friction as possible to increase the chance of conversion, right? So third is the offer. And last is the messaging. But again, the messaging to me is kind of linked to the offer. So it's more 3 than 4. It's very important. Actually, let's start with the messaging. It's very, very important that you don't talk about you, yourself, and your company. People don't have time for that. It's called outreach. They don't know you. And frankly speaking, they don't care. It's important for you to mention what pain points does your product and service actually solves. How can that actually help them fix any problem which they have? Right? This is what matters. So I recommend you to talk about their pain points and all of that, which again, you're likely will know from the triggers, right? If they've just raised funding, they're probably after aggressive growth. If they're after aggressive growth, that means that they're trying, and you can trickle down into the potential pain point that they will have. And that's why the messaging is very important. Uh, on the flip side of that, you want to keep it short, very short. No one has time to read like a 300-word essay in an email. There's actually a bunch of GTM specialists that are doing it the other way around when they write very long email. I'm pretty sure it works, but I think long story short, you can A/B test things, but I would highly recommend you to keep your emails under 80 words and make it super straight to the point. I often tell my team if the meaning of your sentence would be the same if you removed a bunch of words, then remove those words, right? So those will be the main 4 points to running an outbound campaign that works, right? It's your infrastructure, your data, your offer, and your messaging. So we've talked about everything. The last thing to talk about maybe in the outbound is as well as the language. But again, we've already talked about that earlier. Make sure that if you're going to countries that are very localized or businesses that are unlikely to speak English, you want to adapt your outreach to that. So that's that reality cold email. We've already talked about LinkedIn outreach. And the last thing is, if those 2 channels didn't work, keep track of your campaigns. And one of the best channels that still a lot of people are a bit afraid of and underutilizing is your phone, right? If they actually haven't answered your email and answered your LinkedIn DM, just call them. And that actually works. So that's pretty much everything for scaling in APAC. Thank you guys for tuning in into the live. And if you have any questions, feel free to just message me directly on LinkedIn. See you on the next one. Cheers.